Welcome back to The Road Forward, a podcast for trucking industry leaders. Brought to you by TruckSpy, the all-in-one fleet management platform built to empower your drivers to be compliant, productive, and safe. My name's Alex, and we're just going to jump right in. We got the headlines for you. And, the big one that I see a lot of people talking about right now is this new EPA standard that was announced. So, final EPA standards for heavy-duty vehicles to slash dangerous pollution and take key step towards accelerating zero emissions future. So, key thing is this is beginning model year 2027. So, we're a few years away, and it's interesting because the Tesla semi-truck just started. It's, Pepsi, Frito-Lay, you can see all over social media those trucks all over right now. So, it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see where the electric vehicle technology will be compared to this. But it looks like they were focused on, and this is part one of their three-part, attacking the emissions laws or whatever, or something for a better future. Anyways, it's, the EPA's Clean Truck Plan. That's what it is. This is part one right here, it says. So this is going to be interesting to pay attention to see. Of course, immediately, this is from EPA.gov, immediately right here, ATD, so that is the American Journal for Transportation. ATD raises immediate concerns, right, regarding the final NOx emission standards for the commercial trucks. And ATD does have a good point, right? This is a very interesting. In response to the Environmental Protection Agency's announcement of the final nitrogen oxide emissions rule aimed to cut emissions from heavy-duty and medium-duty trucks, American Truck Dealers Chairman Scott McCandless released the following statement. With inflation still at a 40-year high, this rule imposes between $39 and $55 billion in new regulatory costs for the American economy between 2027 and 2045. Consumers will suffer the inflationary effects of the EPA's rules by paying higher prices for food, clothing, and other consumer products that travel by truck. Today's new trucks have already reduced NOx emissions between 98 and 99% when compared to the late 1990s. The EPA rule will likely result in keeping older, less clean trucks on the road longer. The best way to improve air quality is to incentivize fleet turnover and get pre-2010 trucks off the road. The implementation of the rule will raise the cost of some trucks by tens of thousands of dollars. As prices rise, new truck adoption will be delayed and older, less green trucks will remain on American roads. That is a fair point. Can you imagine that the new trucks, they were half the cost or the same cost as a used truck? Who would be driving used trucks, right? That is a fair point. And so by making the trucks more expensive, less and less people will buy them. But that also might be then the old trucks will just get more expensive, right? What comes to mind is those trucks with the new body but the old engine. It's called glider kits, okay? So glider kits are really expensive. But now you could imagine that since there's going to be more and more and more regulations like this, then regular maybe pre-def trucks. I know a lot of people are trying to buy pre-def trucks, especially this past year because there was a def shortage. I know a lot of people are trying to buy trucks with less sensors because sensors failed and there was a big sensor shortage. So there's all these hurdles with making the new trucks have new technology, and people are just going to stick to older trucks. So this is a fair point. It'll be interesting to see just in general exactly how the trucking industry comes out of this because, obviously electric trucks seem to be better. There's just a problem with the batteries and the range, right? That's kind of the main issue. So it's going to be interesting. But on FreightWave, this is ajot.com. I'll link this down below. But another interesting one that I found is on FreightWaves. So daily infographic, Hardy Brothers Trucking delivers U.S. Capitol Christmas tree. So that's pretty cool. It looks like here's a picture of the truck, or maybe that's from their website. You can see their DOT number right here. Never in our wildest dreams, there's a quote, did we think we'd be the ones responsible for delivering the U.S. Capitol Christmas tree? That was a quote. That's pretty cool. And then you can see here's all the updates. It looks like it was a team truck. So I think they delivered it pretty quickly, right? Where did it start? It started in North Carolina and went to Washington, D.C., which I don't think that would need a team truck, I guess. I don't know. But whatever, it's cool. Good for them. I did pull up their DOT right here. So the DOT on that truck picture, which is weird. So 301140, that gives you Packard Leasing Company, which I didn't know you could run a DOT number from the company you're leasing from. I thought that was interesting, but when you actually pull up their actual Hardy Brothers DOT number, you can see right here 50 drivers, 93 trucks. And right here you can see their safety score too. And their safety score is really good. Look, like 0 inspections, 0% out of service. The average is 21.91. And for their driver, you can see 1 inspection, 1%. So and the national average is 6.4. So I mean, certainly the Capital hired a really good a really good trucking company to deliver the Christmas tree. So that's all. There you go. The government knows who to hire. I guess you could make an argument. I just found it weird that the DOT number on the side of their truck is for the leasing company, not for their own trucking company. I thought that was interesting. And then I got another good one for you right here. It is this: can AI from Freight Caviar? Okay, can AI negotiate the best rates? Okay, really interesting. And because California based, was it Pactum? There it is. Pactum company offers automated software to assist negotiations. Okay, and their key thing right here is at the bottom. In a recent pilot program, Walmart International, 64% of the 89 participating suppliers reached deals using Pactum's software. Okay, this was far better than the expected 20%, according to Harvard Business Review. So just think, can you imagine that, like, eventually we're going to get to a place where, you don't even have to call the broker. You could just negotiate or have the AI. So not only don't you have to call the broker, and not only will you not have to chat with the broker right through an app, you could just hire an AI to negotiate for you. That would be interesting to say the least. But again, obviously shippers, manufacturers, they're always trying to save money and spend as little as possible on trucking, just because that affects the bottom line, right? It's like every dollar you save in your expenses is every dollar in profit, right? So they're always going to try to spend as little as possible on transport. So even though this AI tool might help with negotiations, ultimately, probably not. It'll help negotiations for them. That's how the pessimists would probably look at this. But still, really interesting to see how technology advances and how hopefully it can help truckers over the road with rates. I know in a previous episode we covered the dynamic freight pricing that AI is now doing. So that's interesting. But we'll see how in a year this all shakes out and plays out. But speaking of technology and trucking companies, I got Lucas Shore on today. He is one of the founders of Kestrel Insights, and so I think we got a good one. We're going to dive deep into what geofences are and how their company helps truck drivers and software companies and shippers and receivers have more accurate geofences, so that then can result in more accurate data, in and out times, all that good stuff. All right, I'm sitting down with Lucas Shore today, and this is going to be one of those podcasts where I was on the road for 5.5 years, and sometimes as a driver behind the wheel, you maybe don't notice some of the things happening behind the scenes that you get an extreme benefit from. Right. And so we're sitting down with Lucas. He's from Kestrel Insights, and Kestrel Insights, to my understanding, from what I've seen and what I've heard and the brief research that I've done, is Kestrel Insights helps locations and companies like TruckSpy. They help draw the locations in a polygon shape, which is a multi-sided shape, instead of just like a Google Maps pin with a circle. So I don't know if you've ever had it as a driver where you pull up and you're on Google Maps and it says, "Hey, you've arrived," but in reality you're not in the right location. Well, that's a circular shape on the location. Whereas Kestrel Insights, what they do is they help shippers and receivers. They draw the actual shape of the location so that can more accurately get the in and out times for drivers. And that is a huge benefit. So this is what we're going to explore in this episode. Lucas, did I get that right?
Yeah, no, spot on, Alex. I appreciate you having me. Basically, the main word that Kestrel Insights is all about, and I'm sure we'll use a lot today, is a geofence. And a geofence is what you talked about there, that boundary for a facility that helps kind of automate tracking, and for drivers, just help teams better communicate with their drivers, support their drivers, because if we can take tasks off of that, like you said, that back of office behind the scenes, that's more time that can be support drivers, communicate with drivers. So yeah, absolutely. But yeah, you nailed it. It's a good job.
Thanks. A pat on the back for myself on this podcast. So
There
now
you go.
I do want to get into some nitty gritty, right? Because obviously drivers on the road, detention times are massively frustrating, and inaccurate in and out times are also frustrating. And that's certainly what, polygon geofences will help, right? So, but like a couple of questions, like, so what have been some of the fundamental challenges of implementing or helping customers switch from circular geofences to actual polygon geofences? What has been some of the challenges?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think one of the biggest things with geofences that people don't realize is they don't just spawn out of midair. And so someone has to create them. And so let's say a driver gets assigned a
Mhm.
load, it's going from point A to point B. Back office, staff back at the office, they need to create geofences and actually sit on a map and draw shapes for point A and point B. And again, that's time taken away from maybe communicating with the drivers, touching base with the drivers, just supporting the drivers in more ways. So I think the first thing is just to highlight is to show people that is, hey, you don't need to be drawing these. There's an automated way to do this. You can do it with Kestrel. So that's kind of, I think, the biggest transition. But in terms of ease of implementation, there is very, very little barrier to entry because the teams that we're working with, they're already using geofencing. We didn't invent geofencing. We're just bringing a better data source to it. So they've already got the infrastructure, the systems. Usually their software platforms like TruckSpy, they already have geofences built into them and ways to leverage the geofences. It's just a better, more accurate, automated kind of data supply that we're bringing to the table. So in terms of transition, there's really no implementation integration barriers that we typically run into.
Mm-hmm. And so, like in that example that you gave, so a trucking company, like the larger trucking companies, right? They were doing this manually. They were drawing their own geofences, making sure that they are
Yeah.
keeping accurate in and out times for those shippers and receivers. Correct? They were doing this manually.
Yeah, correct. It's insane. So manual if they want the polygons, which is the most accurate. You touched on earlier this idea of circular geofences, which, like you said, type in an address, it drops that red dot on Google Earth or Google Maps, and you just draw a circle around it. That's one of the only ways currently to automate the process, so you're not sitting there drawing these, but they're incredibly inaccurate. And we were working with one trucking company where there was a Home Depot distribution center somewhere in Kansas City, and right across kitty corner from the distribution center was a Love's travel stop. And so they were getting these insane detention reports, 6, 7, 8 hours. And they were confused at what's going on. They're trying to work with drivers to figure out what's going on. And what was happening was the drivers were pulling into the Love's travel stop, hours before their appointment, filling up on gas, resetting their clock, and then they'd go over to their appointment. But this was all happening within that big circle. So it takes time away from drivers' day to try and work with them to say, hey, what happened here? What's going on? When in their mind, they're like, nothing. It was a smooth day. I filled up, went to my appointment on time, in and out. So there's just this confusion of communication sometimes that these geofences can really help alleviate. So they can tell, no, driver was there on time, there for minimal detention in general and no detention at all, and then off and on to their next load. So that communication can start to fall apart with the circles, which is the only automated way currently if you're not working with Kestrel.
But the key thing here is you're just keeping a data set of the geofences, right? You're not keeping track of the truck location. And so what happens if there's if the truck, obviously the truck is somehow saved on or represented on the map too, is the truck a circle shape and then it's a polygon geofence, and like is there ever false positives or issues with that? Like explain to us, explain to me and the viewers like how exactly those work.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because we do get that a lot around where teams will come to us and say, hey, I want to use your geofences and I want to track my vehicles in your database and things like that. That's not where we come in. There's incredible platforms out there, TruckSpy being one of them, tons of telematics, TMS, things like that. So we believe the market for those solutions, there's plenty of options. What we want to do is bring a better data set to be used inside those platforms. So you're right. Yeah, we're maintaining that database, constantly growing of new locations. We've got kind of an automated system for any load that comes through point A, point B, we can create geofences and continue to grow that database. Not only that, but really build and bring a standard to the space where it doesn't exist. Because like, let's say, for example, one trucking company is using circles. The next trucking company is using their own drawn polygons. So now for the drivers, when they're trying to communicate to maybe the on-site when they arrive, detention reports and things like that, not everyone's speaking the same language. So if we can really bring a standard to say, hey, for this distribution center, there's one geofence, everyone can access it. It really It allows, again, the drivers and the shippers to all be on the same page when they start to compare and communicate things like that. So that's a big thing that we like to bring in that data set. Your question around, okay, how is a truck, how is an asset, how is that represented on the map in relation to a polygon geofence? So most platforms, and this is the beauty, is every platform can be different, and if they're using geofences, there's nothing to stop them from accessing this, and they can use it however they want. But typically it's it's that blue dot that we always see. Where's that blue dot on the map? But just dropping that blue dot, it doesn't get you all the way there. So geofence by itself, completely useless. A blue dot by itself, completely useless. What we want to do is bring together the two and compare that location to the geofence. So once that blue dot breaks that geofence, now is when you can start to automate check-in procedures, arrival times, start to build automation around, hey, let's pop up check-in information or things like that. So you need the two together. By themselves, you're not optimizing the value there. And so one of the biggest things we always use is with Kestrel, we really see it as 1 + 1 = 3. So you not only are you collaborating with two valuable platforms, but you're actually accentuating the value you can get out of the two, just if they were looked at solely. So that's kind of a big part of where we typically fit with platforms, how it benefits drivers, and kind of things like that.
I see. And so, are there ever false positives in like relative to the truck location to a polygon geofence? Are there ever issues that run like that you can have?
Your question, Alex, around false positives is really interesting as well, because what we do see is overlap in geofences that can cause a problem. So some of our customers who have maybe 10 or 15 destinations and distribution centers in a real tight area, when they use these circles, they overlap with each other, and they overlap roads, and they overlap other areas, other businesses. So when a truck actually drives down that street, they're creating false positives all along the way. It'll say arrived, departed, because they don't have this accurate geofence to avoid those positives and actually say, no, once you're at your final destination, we know you're truly there, and we'll create a notification to say you're there. So that's definitely where false positives can come in, if there's just inaccuracy or overlap in geofences when that shouldn't exist.
And so your customers, like who are mostly your customers? Is it just individual trucking companies? Is it TMSs like TruckSpy? Who else are your customers?
So typically we work with, like you said, logistics tech platforms, the telematics guys, visibility, TMS, and things like that, because they already have the platforms that are leveraging geofences, familiarity with working with geofences. Their customers are used to working with geofences. Again, we're just bringing a more accurate, more automated data set to them. We definitely work with carriers and typically larger carriers who are building their own internal tools that leverage geofences or other things that leverage geofences. So in the sense, they're basically a software platform. They're just building their own tool. So that's typically where it works. What we've seen the teams who are most eager to implement this is they see the value that, again, it has on the person who's arriving, and the man or woman who's arriving at that distribution center in the truck with the load, because from the simplest form, it's just better visibility looking on a map. If a driver can look at a map and say, okay, this is the exact building I'm going to, instead of, hey, this is the general area. I mean, if you imagine you're in a new city as a driver, never been here before, never been to the site, it's all new. And what people might think as, especially people who are on site at these distribution centers, of, oh, we'll give them these directions, they'll know what's going on. Well, yeah, you live there, you breathe there, you work there every day, you've been there for 5 years. That makes sense to you, but for someone truly out of nowhere, to be able to see that on a map and say, wow, it's this shape, okay, it's by this field, like from the basic sense, that is so helpful. But then the things that can be built on top of that geofence and how valuable they can go from there for both the driver and the back office, it just starts to grow. So yeah, that's typically where we kind of fit in and who we work with.
Okay. So just trucking companies that have their own internal maybe dev teams, right? And then a TMS. So if a carrier is looking at a TMS, make sure they, that might be one of those questions like, hey, does your TMS use polygon geofences, right, to help with that? So those types of customers. But I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
I want to ask like a really an idea that came to my mind is like I used to do like deliveries at military bases. And military bases, they're these big sprawling complexes. They always put some building some tiny place in the middle of like, then you don't know where you're going. You're driving this big truck. You don't want to get lost. You don't want to get kicked out, get revoked, never deliver there again. So, you're always cautious on there. And so we've discussed this before, or you briefly mentioned previously that like you can actually put polygon geofences inside of polygon geofences, right? So you could then stack that. So not only can you then say, hey, here's the general area, or here's the general location and shape of the property, but you can also then identify each individual building that a person would have to go to, correct?
Correct. Yeah. No, that's a great analogy, especially with the military bases. We've seen it with military bases. We've seen it with seaports, massive ports, airports, really large distribution centers. You're exactly right. Where first customers are typically like, hey, I just need to get better polygon geofence. So we start there, and then they're like, okay, this is great. Now how can we continue to optimize and leverage this? And what we call it is nesting geofences. So where we can put geofences inside of geofences. And it's for examples exactly like you said there. If it's a really large location where you want to be able to maybe track when they got there, so you can put a geofence around the gate, but then maybe there's individual buildings or destinations on site that you want better visibility to okay, how are they behaving inside now this massive campus or this massive space? So that can be very helpful. If we can add entry gates and exit gates onto the perimeter of that geofence to now assist with navigation and things like that. Yeah, there's lots of ways that simple idea of just a shape on a map, a geofence, we can start to add things to benefit that driver on site. And that's where a lot of the feedback comes from, is from the drivers who are like, hey, great, the geofence was helpful in terms of automating check-in or things like that. Here are some additional things that would help just my engagement on site or my process on site. And that's things that we can add and continue to grow this data set. And you mentioned how we partner with log tech platforms, and that's absolutely should be an evaluation part of when teams are looking around, because like someone like TruckSpy, they've got this all automated now, and no one's spending time drawing geofences. Not only that, but your guys' end users now have access to this network effect with our database. So even though they think in their sphere they're the only one going to that military base, our database could have multiple users on there. So we're always getting feedback from other people, and that maintained and living database benefits everyone involved. So you guys have really tapped into, and anyone who uses this really taps into kind of a greater ecosystem than just them in their own corner trying to figure out what the heck's going on in the world.
Right. Yeah, I was literally going to go there next, because it's like, so not only do I, as as a former carrier, not only would I benefit from putting all my locations right through you guys putting up there into that data set, but then I actually get a benefit from all the other customers that you have that have uploaded to that data set, and then I know that maybe eventually that I might go to a location that I'm not familiar with, knowing that it's been geofenced by somebody else, and so I can like reap the rewards of all this. So you really try to standardize, you make this a standard in the trucking industry, right? So that more and more shippers, receivers, customers, they're using polygon geofences to make sure that those in and out times are accurate. These locations for navigation, they're accurate. All of these benefits, right? You're really trying to standardize this, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And that's I think we're positioned in a really unique spot to establish a standard here, because there's, like, when we look at competitors and things like that, there's some great platforms out there, telematics platforms out there that have their own in-house geofencing databases. The problem is they inherently can never be the standard, because as a competitive advantage, and I get it, they don't want to open up their databases to everyone else. And so therefore it forces other platforms to therefore build their own geofences, and now duplicates occur, and that standard is inherently shattered. There's no UI for Kestrel Insights. There's no dashboard you're logging into to track your vehicles, to freight match, to load match, to pricing. There's none of that here. We are just a database for geofences and geospatial data to bring to the industry. So we can be that standard. We can be agnostic across platforms, and to allow that standard to grow. And so I think that's really, really valuable, and something that I think people are definitely catching on to. And we already see it a lot with different customers. They're like, hey, here's a bunch of airports or seaports or distribution centers, and when we run it through our system, we're like, great, we've already got them. They've already been used, and we've received feedback on, and people love seeing that, because they're not the first one to peek behind the door and see like, hey, is it accurate or is it there? It's like, oh, we've already got it out there. You're benefiting from that ecosystem. So yeah, it's a great look at it.
Right. And Yeah, this certainly goes into one of those things that maybe as a driver, you're behind the wheel, you definitely would never guess that, like, hey, there's companies working on this tiny little, like, I don't want to say tiny little, but like this very specific problem
Yeah.
that like eventually truckers will reap the reward from, right? So it's like, I mean, obviously shippers will reap the reward because they'll get accuracy in the location data and the in and out times. But just in general, it's, you know, specifically for navigation and arrival times, it's like trucking companies will reap that reward for sure. And so it's like you would never guess that behind the wheel, there's these companies that are doing like solving these like very specific problems. So that's really cool. So
Yeah.
how did this idea even come to be? Were you sitting there one day? It's like, oh, you know what's a really cool idea? Geofences. Like, how did this come to be?
Yeah, no, it's funny because and don't worry, I don't take offense to, you know, the small corner problem, and because we know that and we're set up with knowing that. So what I mean by that is when teams often engage with us, so like they think integration, they think developers, they think engineers, they think this huge transition. Not even close. Like we've had teams
Mm-hmm.
in the same, and this, you guys were an incredible example for this. So quickly had the conversation, saw the value, data was over. You know, team, you can leverage this type of data immediately. We really see it as kind of an unplug and plug in, and that's it. There's not this huge, you know, API documentation packet you got to go through. And so if you're using geofences and you have not automated them yet, there is value here, and then that leveraging that use case and leveraging the value there can happen very, very quickly. In terms of how we got here, yeah, it's a great question. We our founders and our founding group, myself and two others, we had some experience in data in agriculture spaces, and where they saw huge flood of software to the space, and then not the right data sources to really optimize these platforms that were out there, and saw a lot of parallels with the trucking and transportation, and we're able to see just how manual and inaccurate the process was of leveraging geofences. We saw I mean, we didn't invent geofencing. That's widely used, very, very integral part of the industry. We just saw a better way to access needed geofences, and that's kind of what we dove into. I'm not. I have never claimed, you know, I don't have this huge background in brokering or ran a carrier or worked at a carrier, things like that. I let the people who know this industry and who are pros at this industry do all that. What we do know is we know data, we know geofences, we know geospatial data, and we stick to our lane, and we understand that, we respect that, and we like I said earlier, our data is useless by itself. We need partners. Partners are the ones who know the industry, have built all these tools to, you know, just make drivers' days easier and smoother. And we are a data source that can aid in that. But we can't do it alone, and we don't want to do it alone. So
Right.
that's kind of how we got here.
But so the idea was just more or less like, hey, you were sitting around with your co-founders, and you guys just saw that this was an issue from those farmers, right? That's kind of where the idea came to be.
Or yeah, that was kind of some parallels we had seen in business experience in the past, and yeah, we just saw them how manual of a process it was, and we just were like, there's no way that there's not a way that this can be automated, or really. And then we just saw the lack of standards. We saw very quickly multiple groups going to the same location, and they all had different geofences, or some of them had circles, or some of them drew them themselves. And then we saw from the shipper's point of view, if I have all these different teams coming to me to report detention times or arrival times, and they're all using different geofences, how am I supposed to have any level playing field here, or not trust from a perspective of you think something's malicious or trying to take advantage of you, but just trust in the data because it's all different.
Right.
So that was kind of both sides, from the manual perspective, and then just the lack of standards that kind of invigorated diving into this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's with maybe autonomous trucks. Who knows how far out in the future they are? You know, it's like the accurate location in and out times is going to be really, that's going to be great.
I was just say, we've even had unique scenarios for like drone delivery. People have reached out for drone delivery because, yeah, you've got the polygon for like the 2D view on a map. But what if we look at that 3D now and add a Z component to it to say, all right, this geofence, but now 100 meters high. And you can now create these 3D geofences to help with that arrival of drones and things like that. And the same idea of like an arrival gate, where we put a single lat long point on the geofence for a truck to arrive. You could do a 3D kind kind of area for where a drone needs to enter. So there's a lot of interesting applications, like you said, with autonomy, drone delivery, things like that. So yeah, it's great. But today, that stuff's going to come, that's a ways down the road. Today, we're focused on just how can this help make a driver's arrival at a location they've never been to, something like that. Automate the tracking, automate check-in procedures and things like that. How can this geofence? That's all we focus on is this geofence. How can that support the driver in their day-to-day? So
right, it's so funny you mentioned. I didn't even think about drone delivery. Right, it's like because a drone can't just that's like a truck. A truck can only go in on the road. So it's like a drone can't just fly in anywhere.
Yeah.
So totally didn't even think about that. That like there's probably a specific area you want the drone to land and drop the package. Or otherwise packages are going to be, it's raining packages or so, they're like, so wow.
Or like you hit a tree or there's a billboard or something. Yeah.
Right. Wow. So that's it's going to be interesting. But like I said, the podcast is called The Road Forward. You mentioned that you weren't a truck driver. You weren't in the trucking space, so to speak, but you help obviously, the trucking industry, but like, where do you think the industry is going as a whole? Just obviously since the podcast is called The Road Forward. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And like I said, there's people who, understand the day-to-day and the movement of freight and the forecasting and predictions so much better than what we do. But being in the space, because all we do is work in supply chain logistics. So all our database is focused on our supply chain nodes. So distribution centers, airports, seaports. So obviously, this is where we work and live and breathe. I think it's just been interesting to see. Obviously, I think the word digital transformation is the most overused, annoying buzzword on planet Earth. But I think as you see just the comfortability really with software and data, and really the comfortability with data, that word for some people puts the hair up on the back of their neck. Like, oh, data privacy, data sharing, data. It makes people nervous. But I think once you really get into it and you can see, hey, there's so many data sources like ours, totally anonymous, totally anonymized. There's no personal data we deal with here. So I think just understanding familiarity with data and how it can benefit your industry or your platform specifically is interesting to see how that's growing. We had a conversation with the team over at Vision API. And one of the things they had talked about was we talked about them was how do you see people going forward in kind of a buy versus build mentality, a partnership mentality. And I think in this industry, that partnership mentality is really starting to grow and people are seeing the value and, hey, we're a TMS and we do so many things really, really great. Do we want to build out a team of all these engineers and data analysts to now in-house draw a bunch of geofences or create geofences? Or do we take those resources to build out on our existing value propositions and partner with the Kestrel Insights or someone like that? So I think that partnership mentality in the industry is growing a ton. And I see that continuing to go forward and be an integral part of just how people derive value from what they do day to day here.
Right. So it's going to be a more connected supply chain, right? And then not only more connected, but because there's going to be more data available, it'll be, probably more transparent as in like, here's where it went wrong or something. So hopefully by all accounts, we don't have ourselves, the last 2 years or last year and a half of all the delays and the problems that we've had. Hopefully we don't repeat that, right? That's kind of the goal, more interconnected supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's all to reduce errors is always the goal. And yeah, that interconnectivity. And I think just that really comes like that partnership mentality around not so much, oh, am I giving away any kind of competitive advantage to them by doing that? It's like, no, this is, if drawing geofences on a map is not a core competency to your business, find a partner like Kestrel Insights and just have them do it. So that way you can continue to focus on what is a core competency of your product or your platform. And since that's what you excel at, that's what and I really just see that as kind of just a valuable part of where the industry's going.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this week's show. Huge thanks to Lucas for coming on. It was really great talking to him and seeing, like how there are companies out there that are solving very, very specific problems. So it's really cool. And on top of that, if you want to leave us some feedback or a review, there's comments down below and reviews, of course, wherever you're listening to this. And I will look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.